So, good afternoon. So what I'd like to do today is cover a bit of a retrospective, looking back initially, then cover some of the pieces around the topic of automation and how, obviously, it's been covered a lot today, a big theme around how do that link to continuous delivery, how does it become an enabling capability. There's also something I want to touch on around automation itself and go through some real live case examples of customers that we've worked with in these types of regulated industry who've actually got some significant transformational benefits and really show them to see how that could be relevant for your organization. And then really just some follow-ups around how do you pull all this thing together for what's called the 5 C's, which I'll cover in a second, and then where next. So if you're kind of embarking on this journey or you're partway through it, what are the kind of things you should think about. So as Andre kindly invited the bit about my background, worked in the software industry for quite a while, worked with large companies, small companies. I actually ran a mobile telco for 5 years, and that was quite interesting, given the relevance of mobile in the industry today. This was when Nokia 3310, you could just do talk and text. This was 2002, when that was about, there's nothing such as a smartphone or an iPhone. I was actually lucky enough to be in the Telefonica, with the Telefonica board, when Matthew Key, who was the CEO of Telefonica Europe, actually did the deal with Steve Jobs for the iPhone. They brought the first iPhone into the office. And it was quite a kind of a bit of a, kind of one of those kind of moments you never forget. Also, the interesting thing is, because obviously I started in the tech industry quite a long time ago, is it seems to be quite cool. It's kind of gone through a kind of a full renaissance. And obviously now the kind of DevOps and continuous integration, continuous delivery kind of context helps that as well. And as I said before, there was life before DevOps. It's this I met some guys a couple of days ago in London. What was it? It was a continuous delivery meetup group, which actually meets about every month, and it's run by a guy who used to run in the UK, there's a big website called thetrainline.com, and he used to be the build and release automation manager from that. And he's putting these guys together. And it was a very interesting thing. So when you talk to people now, they say, okay, what's your job title? And this guy said, I'm a DevOps manager. And then you go into this survey, obviously we did a bit earlier, if you're from the dev or the ops side, and you actually get quite a balance in those kind of times. The bit of Silicon Valley experience that I had was working with a company called WANdisco, who basically, this was about 6-7 years ago, when actually ClearCase was the source code management platform of choice. And obviously now that's kind of now Git, and Subversion is kind of passed by. So it's interesting how the market evolves. So I noticed through all the presentations today, we actually have kind of ignored the World Cup, this World Cup thing that's going on. When Alex and myself were walking down the street last night, there was about 25 TV screens. So on the 12th of June, we actually ran a survey, and we actually asked all our contact base in worldwide, said, who should Midvision support? Because basically across our organisation, there's about 10 different countries represented. And this is absolutely true data. We actually got 4 countries that were actually level from a voting point of view. Absolutely correct, yeah? And obviously I've marked up there the 2 that have obviously kind of unfortunately fallen out of the competition, unless there's an absolute divine miracle that England actually recover through Costa Rica. Obviously now coming to Germany last night, it was quite interesting, quite relevant. So I don't know what your vote is, whether it's Argentina or Germany. I presume maybe Germany's going to probably just edge it in this room, I would have thought. Is that fair? So looking back. So obviously this is apparently what developers do. They look at these now 2 screens, obviously, and they usually have a Mac. And there's obviously a bit of an IDE they're looking at doing some development. And this is obviously what 2 developers do. So the kind of, pair programming, XP, how you get that together. But you may remember this guy. I don't know if you recognize this guy. He's kind of one of the fathers of the Agile movement, Agile Manifesto, Martin Fowler, who's obviously at ThoughtWorks. And then you probably recognize this concept. So there's been a lot of talk about this the last few years since Gene Kim brought his famous book out, which I know you've hopefully all got a copy of today. This concept of unicorns. And you probably recognize some of these brands. So these are the kind of the disruptors that have come into the market to create new business models. And this is a really relevant quote to a lot of the sentiment that's happened earlier today. And this was happened 10 days ago, literally, roughly. And this guy's actually called Anthony Jenkins, which I thought was absolutely staggering, given that we're at the Jenkins CloudBees session this week. But you can see here, what he's saying is if he potentially is looking at the risk of being actually replaced by firms such as PayPal and Amazon. So that just shows on the CEO agenda of Barclays, obviously a very successful banking financial service organization, they are seriously worried about what these new Web 2.0, Web 3.0 organizations can do to them. And obviously, as Andrea mentioned about, we operate in this kind of regulated environment. I'll explain a bit about that later on, about where our heritage is and why we can talk about that. But this is a great quote from, obviously, the ex-former US Deputy Attorney, Paul McNulty, about the actual cost of not keeping on the right side of the proverbial law. Yeah? So it's this kind of, what I would say, it's a bit of a balancing act. You want to be agile, you want to be transformative, you want to do all the sexy stuff, but also how do you balance that based on what your business model is, what your operating model is in the regulatory or environment you're actually operating as a business. So how do you achieve those goals? So this I'm showing my age now. There's a concept called MOSCO when you're prioritizing business requirements. So you must do's, should do's, could do's, won't do's. Make sense? So before I go into that, this is harking back to my old Tesco days when I used to go and put bread on shelves. Yeah, we used to have to go back into store and actually stack shelves for a week, part of going back to the shop floor. This is a grocery supply chain, from the farm to the actual shelf. So back in 2001, Tesco implemented a new system called CR. Can you guess what the C meant? Continuous. And the R meant? Replenishment. So what it was basically was every time an item was sold through the till at the front end, many tills, it would trigger, based on a stock level, a replenishment. And what that did was that revolutionized the way Tesco could range stock. So in a store it would potentially range in a category 2,500 lines. It could potentially double the number of lines it could stock because it was effectively replenishing in small batches. Yeah? So you think about that. You think about lean, this is surprising, it's Dan Jones, who's the author of The Machine That Changed the World with Womack. Yeah? Not Womack and Womack, Womack and Jones. Not the pop band. But basically these principles are, this is a value stream map. So this is looking at the whole ecosystem or the whole supply chain. And what we're saying is that it's pointless having a very, very efficient factory if you can't actually supply that efficiently to the shop floor, because you're always going to disappoint the customer. So you think about that in the context of what we've been talking about already today. And part of that is this, because the kind of the batching implies long lead times, lots of stock, obsolescence, overstocks, and effectively when you get a variation in demand, that's when you get pressured on availability on the shop floor, and then customers vote with their feet. Yeah? So you get an unhappy customer. So how does this relate to IT? So the problem statement, and I suppose I was part of this wave, back in the mid-90s, there was this thing called the Y2K worry. Yeah? You must replace all your systems before the year 2000. So I worked for this small German software company called SAP that you may have heard of. And the mass adoption, yeah? And then it was the biggest anticlimax ever probably in the history of the IT industry, pretty much. But effectively what's happening in these waves is similar kind of disruptive is happening now with this what we call a smack stack, which you may have heard. Cognizant, who's one of the big global SIs, I think they've nabbed all the domain names around that. And basically what it means is social, mobile, analytics and cloud, which is creating this compelling event around being more rapid, more agile in how you deliver business applications. And obviously given the regulatory pressure and the industry pressure that we mentioned a bit earlier. The interesting stat, point number 3 around Gartner, about showing the number of outages by 2015 caused by people and process issues, so not having that repeatable, reliable process. So how do you actually, step change your capability in the right way to actually address these issues? And the interesting thing is in automation, it's actually at a single-digit adoption curve as well. So there's a big market. It's actually a $17, $18 billion market, this software segment, but actually it's still at single-digit for automation adoption. So you're going to evolve to this concept of the software, not the grocery supply chain, but actually the software manufacturing pipeline. And you've probably noticed, if you look at this diagram carefully, what you've actually got is you've got development, and then you've got deployment, then you've got testing. Anybody know why I've put that in like that? Why have I structured it like that? Any view? The view is because effectively you can develop something, but then maybe your testing environment and your QA environment and your pre-prod and your production will be a different infrastructure. Be a different scale out of infrastructure. As you get close to production, you've obviously got to emulate what your production load would be. And obviously, Gareth from Soasta was talking about how you can help down that continuous testing cycle. So when you think about that, you've got to think about how do you package up things up and deploy it into those different environments in a smart, reliable way that's consistent and actually hits the bullseye every time. So we talked about DevOps. We have this concept called the onion, the DevOps onion. So we view that the DevOps is effectively the philosophy. It's the cultural piece around how you get the organization teams to work together. Continuous delivery is the practice, and then obviously underpinning that is our tools to do the job. And that's where effectively our sales mid-vision fits in. So I saw this great quote from DevOps Borat that I just had to put in there. So what is continuous delivery? As we talked about Martin Fowler, these are the guys that wrote the Manager Manifesto. As was being talked about, it's a logical extension to this continuous integration. So it's great getting the build done, but how do you actually get to the actual shop floor, to the actual shelf with the product you want to deliver? And as it says there, finished really means it's in production. And the thing in quotes is actually, it's the first line of the Agile Manifesto. So it means it's important to, highest priority, satisfy the customer and make sure it's valuable. Because, and why do we do this, is because actually this is where the crossover starts to happen between the thing about the value stream map I showed you with the grocery supply chain and the concept of how do you step change that system development life cycle and think about it from a lean point of view. And you've got Dusty Bin there. I don't know if you remember, I'm showing my age again. Dusty Bin was a famous character in a TV program in the, I think, 1970s, I think, wasn't it? Maybe not. But you can see there, deliver fast, build quality in, optimize the whole, take waste out, muda, as they call in Japanese, remove the waste, and empower the team. So you think about that, and you think about the principles that we've been talking about already today, very, very relevant to the kind of continuous delivery concept. And I was astonished at this slide, I just had to put it in. Even SAP, bless them, who my wife worked for 18 years as well, are doing continuous delivery. Great line, from dinosaur to spaceship in 2 years. What a fantastic line. But as you can see there, the bottom of it is saying, stakeholders, business stakeholders frustrated, and now they're very happy. And you can see some about the stats that they're doing there. So, the kind of velocity of their change and their process. So what you want to do in continuous delivery is these are some of the goals that I think you're trying to achieve. You're trying to reduce that cycle time, trying to take waste out of that overall process, reduce the software inventory as you go down that process, and obviously overall increase that feedback cycle. So fail and get that feedback back so you can actually reduce that kind of fear, uncertainty and doubt around delivering the change, and overall increase the agility. I'm not going to cover all these points, but effectively, some of the things here this is some of the stuff from Dave Farley. And the interesting point is there, he says, I automate almost everything. So what he's saying is actually, and we would say, automate smartly what you want to put in your overall new cycle, your new game-changing process. Don't just go from nothing to everything and hope you're going to get the results you want. And I think the other point is I went to a session with Just Eat. I don't know if you know those guys. It's a kind of international website. and they were at an Amazon Web Services meetup group, which is quite interesting in London. It's massive. It's like 400 people turn up and eat pizzas and drink beer. And they really articulated the DevOps concept. So each part of the website in Just Eat is actually, there's a DevOps team, and they're completely on call 24/7. So you can see they mapped it out on the wall live. You know, there's all these guys in Brazil ordering their Brazilian food. Then there's obviously guys in Norway ordering their food. Guys in Bradford in the UK ordering their Indian takeaways. It was quite interesting how they operated, but they were very, very progressive in their use of DevOps concepts and actually accountability for the developers and the operation team working seamlessly together. So quite a bit of a question for you. So how long does it take to deploy a single line of code for yourselves today? Who can do it in, I don't know, 10 minutes? That's pretty impressive. An hour? Okay. They're already there, look. Continuous delivery, whoosh. 3 hours? A day? A week? A month? That's interesting, actually. So it's quite actual a distribution, actually, and there's quite a lot of fast delivery already there. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, give you an example. One of our, you probably heard some of the stats about this. You know, that Amazon releases, you know, tens of thousands of changes per day. You know, one of our banking customers, they release about 5,000 to 6,000 changes per month in their release cycle, and they're quite proud of that. And they've been an 18-month DevOps evolution on that. So it's not overnight, but you can get there. So what you must do, we talk about some of the Moscow principles, you must think about how do you visualize and have a deployment pipeline. You need to be in control and know what's going on in your shop. Obviously, as we talked about, those small batch sizes are going to reduce the risk. The fast feedback is going to reduce the inventory, as also make it more efficient. This is a classic picture, this. I don't know if anybody smiled when they saw that. You know, we don't automate because we haven't got time. We don't automate because we haven't got time. But what I think the point I'm trying to make here is once you've defined your pipeline, what you've got to think about is what are the bits of that SDLC, that system development lifecycle, that you want to actually automate. And obviously the previous presentation with Gareth was very, very articulate in saying there's a great opportunity around the testing piece. Obviously where we play in is how we help you on the deployment side. What this should do, as you think about, is also on the SOA side, is there's a big push that I'm noting about microservices. Now, if you think about Amazon stories, that they started obviously, I think, with those kind of principles very, very early on. So they didn't build one monolithic app. They actually allowed us to build it in a smart way from day one, which allowed them to be very agile. And what we're saying here is, if you've not already shifted to an SOA, you should really think about that. What I've noticed is a lot of push around how do you actually even more fine-grain your services so you can actually then drive even further componentization. One of the important things here, I think, is also this thing called technical debt. People know about bugs, but it's that kind of elephant in the room sometimes about, you know, what is the technical debt backlog, what we're going to do to address that. So it's that kind of invisible thing that we know we're always going to want to fix, but we never get around to fixing it. A few smiles. So in the context of continuing should and coulds, what you should also do is think about co-location, so moving your dev teams close to the customer, and also removing this kind of other thing about the blame culture, because when you go through this change of evolving your organisation, you're going to go through some interesting HR and people issues about people getting on board the bus. Part of the thing that helps with that, I think, is some kind of continuous improvement Kaizen kind of thinking you should be thinking about, like Toyota. There's also things like promoting retrospective across the company, which is kind of an agile thing anyway. That's going to help communication, it's going to raise the bar on how people can learn best practice. thing about amplifying metrics is then actually, how many deployments have we done, which one's a success, celebrate success, which one's failed, cause, how do we learn from that and go back around the circle. I think the point I would make, I'm talking to one of my government customers today, they actually describe their project as the nastiest project they've ever worked on. Literally said nasty. It was a nasty project. And it was literally the CEO of this company, because they actually had an issue where it was going to take them 6 days to release their application. So they actually had to switch for 6 days. It was kind of unacceptable, and it kind of went from CIO all the way up to CEO. So they changed the way they adopted that particular change, and we helped them get there. But I think what it showed was that they actually had to go through a big journey to get their head around that. Yeah. And they had to have a lot of hard conversations to realise how they broke that down and how they actually did it differently. So it's not an easy thing, you can get there. So where are you now? So is your application portfolio built on Quicksand, or is it built on strong foundations? Have you got some interdependencies that's going to cause problems? Have you done that fine graining? Have you done that kind of how you've re-architected and recomponentized your application? Do you spend all your time fixing bugs? So you need to slow down and assess, kind of do a bit of reflection and work out where you should go. Some of the outcomes you can get from doing this right, and the benefits, are obviously, ideally you get this alignment between the apps and the teams. You can actually get to a point where you can do single button deployments because you've codified it in a way that you know it's reliable, it's going to deploy all along the cycle in a consistent, reliable way. But it, sometimes goes wrong, so you can also roll it back as well. And there's a concept of blue and green deployments, which you probably come across. So, how do you switch when you've got that thing about automating it? How do you switch it and then switch it back? So move from blue to green as you deploy through the router. So overall, delivery certainty is going to increase. And also, you get around the problem where you're actually having to work weekends. So automation. So what we believe is people want to be faster, they want to be safer in the way they deploy things, and they want to be cheaper. I know people don't want to talk about cheaper, but they want to reduce their TCO. So part of that, our mantra is to build once and then deploy anywhere. Yeah? So put the effort in to build that model that you can actually then deploy consistently down your life cycle. Also use version control, build configuration, so you can actually make sure you keep it in the same context. And also think about a model-driven deployment. So by parameterizing it, whether it's the actual link to the data source is just different between dev and test, etc., or it's a heap size in a Java virtual machine, that's the only difference. Everything else should be consistently available. So some of the customers that we talk to and work with, this is an example, and this is literally an example of one of the largest banks in Europe and the kind of productivity piece around deploying something as complex, if you've ever worked on it, IBM WebSphere. Literally a 500%, over 500% productivity improvement, and reducing the build time and deployment time from 4 hours to 14 minutes. Now obviously there was some effort into to codify that and to convert that from manual to automated, but that's the kind of step change you can do. And those are the number of man days that you can save from an effort point of view, so that you deploy yourself onto more value-added activities. This is another example of a global life sciences company who actually now use our platform to effectively broker all their financial and supply chain transactions, whether it's SAP or non-SAP, and they got that down from 4 hours to less than 15 minutes. So how they deploy that part of the application. So the velocity of their change is now significantly faster, and automation was the key to do that. They had to put the effort in, they had to design it and get the right people together, but that was part of the outcome from that. A North American healthcare company, which is a Fortune 15 company in the US, they've effectively built what Gartner view is quite kind of like a best practice. So a PaaS, platform on demand, platform as a service, on demand, and they were taking 12 weeks to provision that traditionally from a service catalog. Now they can do it in 1.5 hours maximum, and that's deploying it over 20,000 servers. So you've obviously got something about provisioning environments and applications. You can do it at scale, and that's a reality. And this is the UK government one, where effectively we helped them deliver something which was one of the first agile transformations in the UK, and this was their release nightmare, from 6 days down to 6 hours. And this is an honest quote where he said he'd never experienced a project which had delivered ahead of time and a budget. They normally overblew the budget, overblew the time, didn't deliver the scope. And that's the improvement that they had on their release cycle time. So why people are not adopting automation? We did a survey a while ago with D-Zone, and these are some of the issues there. Cultural blockers, the most significant amongst those surveyed. Different business priorities and stagnant organizations, the biggest blockers to automation, etc., etc. People feel that they can't balance the business priorities and implement automation simultaneously. Don't know if it applies to you, but that's an interesting insight. And then this was about the technology-related blockers. There's one technology obstacle raised, it's indecision. Deployment automation is a wide open market with opportunities for solution providers to stand out and become leaders by sharing more information on how their technology works. Obviously today's kind of part of that exercise. So I suppose the question would be is, what would be your story if you applied automation to the level you could do? So just to finish off, this is from the UK government website. They actually call continuous delivery making releases boring, which I thought was quite funny. This is actually on the live site as well. But obviously much more important is automate your deployment process so you are forced to fully understand it. Any key issues with moving code from your version control system into production when it's gone live can be dealt with early on. Sounds like a good mantra. So without going through the detail, my 5 C's effectively are saying that to deliver continuous delivery, you need to have continuous integration. Obviously, with the Jenkins heritage, there's a great integration there, and obviously with their continuous delivery platform as well. Continuous deployment, that's where obviously we play. Continuous testing, which has obviously been the previous presentation. The approvals and governance and rollback is obviously kind of the regulatory stuff that you have to do. So you can be doing continuous delivery, but you'll still need to approve things down the life cycle. And also a big area that's blowing up as well now with App Dynamics and New Relic and some of those guys is this continuous monitoring. So how do you feed back from the actual live production application into the team so you can actually improve going forward? So key takeaways really are, I'm a big fan of value stream maps. If you haven't done it for your existing environment, I would recommend you do it because it really identifies where the waste is and where the opportunity for automation could be. And also, obviously, it's that classic thing about identifying quick wins to build stakeholder confidence. And with the slides that Steve presented a bit earlier, there's obviously a magnitude of tools you need to think about. You just need to work out and map that through as part of the process of selecting the right tools to do the job. So where next? This is a blatant plug. So Gartner just recently actually recognized us and called us the cool vendor for DevOps for 2014. So we're going to maximize the opportunity in 2014. As of the 1st of January, we'll be uncool again. No, I'm joking. So that was quite nice to get. The reason we got that kind of recognition is because we can actually provision the environments as well as the applications that run in those environments. We've obviously proven at scale. We integrate very nicely with open source. We've got a 2-way plugin with Jenkins and obviously Subversion, and these are some of the customers that we work with. So across industry sector, global companies, different industry sectors. So I had to put this in. This is Beaker for all you Muppet Show fans. And this is obviously, this segue back to people actually say, I'm a DevOps engineer now, or I was a developer yesterday, but now I'm a DevOps engineer. Obviously, it's going to evolve this market, and it's quite an exciting place to be, I think. So, but if you're in doubt, my recommendation is keep calm and automate on. Or you could, blatantly steal this from Andre, keep calm and deliver continuously. But make sure you do release more. And all I can say is thank you for listening to me.